Welcome, everybody. I am so thrilled to have you here for this inaugural episode of our Communities Strengthening Themselves Real to Real, Family to Family Real Talk. That series, just the brief description, is that we're going to have conversations with a range of community members and explore the unique visions, wisdom, and resources that are indispensable to addressing challenges children, families, and communities face. And we hope to broaden and deepen our understanding of under-recognized approaches to challenges. I can think of no better way than to start this series than with the wonderful Chaplain Clementina Chéry, and I will tell you more about her in just a moment. But let me start, as I always do, with a little bit of business. So today's conversation will be in Spanish and English. In your webinar controls, click Interpretation and click the language that you'd like to hear. To hear only the interpreted language, you click Mute Original Audio. And I want to give a shout out to Maria Jose Gutierrez, who is once again translating for us all the way from Colombia. So thank you, Maria, for the great job you always do with this. We also do have closed captioning and live transcript. So in your webinar controls, click Closed Caption, click on Show Subtitle, and then if you want to adjust the size of your subtitles, just click Subtitle Settings. And this is very important. If you want to ask our presenter a question, use the Q&A feature to ensure that we see that question. And just to be clear, you can write your questions in at any time, but we're most likely to address them starting at 3 to 4. I'll be interviewing Clementina Chéry, and then at 4, we will turn full attention to questions if we haven't addressed them already. But you can write them in at any point. On the other hand, if you have a comment or a technical issue that you want to share, just use the chat feature to speak with other attendees and BTC support staff, and make sure to choose all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your comment. We once again want to thank our sponsors, the Bezos Family Foundation, Room.org, Brazelton Touchpoints Foundation, and BTC's community of supporters. So, as I said, today I am so thrilled to have Chaplain Clementina Chéry with us. She is the founder, president, and CEO of the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute in Boston. And for those of you who've ever encountered her and her work, you know that you're in for a treat. If any of you haven't, I'm so thrilled to be able to give you the opportunity. It's life-changing to talk to Clementina, who you've given me permission to call you that. Yes, Clementina. Yes. I'm going to just try to say a little bit from your very extensive bio, so people just get a little sense of who you are, and everyone can bear with me. But hopefully we'll also be able to flesh that out as you speak to us today. And I am just pulling this up. Here we go. So, Clementina Chéry has founded the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute in Boston, which is a center of healing and teaching and learning for families and communities impacted by murder, trauma, grief, and loss. Clementina Chéry founded this Peace Institute in 1994 after her 15-year-old son, Louis D. Brown, was murdered in the crossfire of a shootout. Chaplain Chéry has developed the best practices in the field of homicide response, which we'll be hearing more about today. Her professional goal is to transform society's response to homicide so that all families are treated with dignity and compassion, regardless of the circumstances. Her spiritual goal is to become a minister of God's peace that is rooted in love, unity, faith, hope, courage, justice, and forgiveness. And in 2023, she launched the Peace Principle, which is her own podcast, where she leads conversations on ways to heal our wounded hearts. She received an honorary doctorate of ministry from the College of Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts, and was ordained as a senior chaplain with the International Fellowship of Chaplain in 2012. And she cites her greatest accomplishments as being the mother of Louis, Alexandra, and Alan, and the grandmother of Alexander, Adriel, and Amani. So welcome, Chaplain Clementina. We're so thrilled to have you here today. We just have so much to learn that my only worry, of course, is that we will not have time to even begin to cover all the incredible work that you've done and the vision that you have. But we're going to try. We'll give it a whole fighting spirit. So I was wondering if you could help us out by starting just to tell us a little bit about your own background. And you can go way back because I think it would be good for us to just know a little bit about who you are in this world, where you're coming from in terms of your thinking and your experiences.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Laura, and to the sponsors, the BTC Family, for giving me the opportunity to really just be here and be present and to learn and also to share. So you said go way back. Oh my goodness, you're really taking me way back. So I came to this country when I was 10 years old. Originally, I'm from Honduras, Central America. And I came here, for a better life, like many immigrants. My mom came here, my dad came here, do the best that they can to prepare their children to come up. So I came to this country, young, getting Christmas cards and seeing all the excitement when my mom came back to Honduras. We believe that the streets of America were paved with gold, and you go to the trees and you shake and money will come down. Well, reality hit. Coming here at 10, what I realized that I understood what loss was for the first time, because I'm coming to a country that I really don't know anything about. And I often tell people I'd never dealt with racism. I dealt with culturism and colorism. And coming here by the way of New York, I speak Spanish, but also I didn't look like my Spanish classmates. I spoke English, but I didn't sound like my English classmates. So that was my first introduction to the United States of America. My Spanish classmates would call me a little piece of burnt toast. That was, again, terms of endearment. And then my African American classmates would tell me to go back on the banana boat that I came from. I think it was in that time that I realized that I had to go within me and within my upbringing and within my belief and within the values that I was raised with to rise above name callings, to rise above, feeling like not belonging. And I think that that's when my journey really started. And then coming, then instead of focusing on the name callings, what I did was focus on my strength. I helped my Spanish classmate pass English, and I helped my English classmate pass Spanish. And so I became the central of attention in really bridging two cultures together that never got along. And so that I feel was my beginning of really the work that I'm doing now. And then even coming then to live to Boston with my mom, it was the same thing, being in a space that again, that I never felt that I belonged, because I could speak Spanish, but I didn't look like them. And I could speak English, but I didn't sound like them because of my accent. Yet again, really focusing on my culture and my upbringing and the values, and focusing on what I have within me and not what other people are saying that I either don't have or that I'm not.
So positive from the very start of facing challenges. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I didn't think about it then, because I knew if I gave in, and I was, smaller than my other classmates, I think they would have just pounced on me and make mincemeat out of me. So I, like some people say, you you make lemonade from lemons.
Yeah, I hear that. So then you were here. Maybe take us through the beginning of your family formation, starting a family of your own. And if there's a piece, I actually don't know, Clementina, if there was a work piece that you wanted to bring into beyond when you grew up, what your education and goals were. So let us know.
Yeah, so coming again, this is a story that is known, but I don't think people, pay any attention to it. I came to live with my mom, working. My first job was actually the Boys and Girls Club, the Colonel Daniel Mars Boys and Girls Club. Had a summer job and then doing, a beginning of summer things. I don't know if people here are old enough to understand summer thing that Boston had, summer works, and really, cleaning parks and grass and picking up trash and just making the community a space to be. And then starting my own family, I was a teenage mom. I got pregnant at the age of 16. And I knew that broke my mother's heart and my sister's, because here's a baby having a baby. I'm the younger of two older sisters. And so here's a baby having a baby. Yet what I realized, that even though I had Lewis at a very young age, he really was raised by a community, that I didn't have to do this on my own. What people also don't know, or if they do know, they don't remember that Lewis was a twin and the girl died of childbirth. So grief and death, was a part of my journey from a younger age. Yet I realized that I needed to grieve my daughter that was stillbirth. Yet at the same time, I also needed to be that teenage mom for my son that was alive, and that's Lewis. And also, I didn't have to raise him by myself. I had my sisters, I had my mom, who, as disappointed as she was, Lewis was her heart because he was her first grandson. And so then after that, raised him by myself within the community. I did finish high school, and that's what I would say. I went to the Jeremiah Burke High School. And at that time, even though I was pregnant, they sent me to a school, Crintonton Haston House. It was a school for young girls who were pregnant. So I did graduate with my class in 1978. And in 1978 is also when I gave birth to Lewis. And raised him, went to work, then went to work for McDonald's. And in McDonald's, this is a funny story. In McDonald's, for me, my mother would always say, God rest her soul, it doesn't matter what job you have, you always take pride and do the best. So I started working at McDonald's, and I was sweeping the lobbies and cleaning the bathroom. And my mother would always say, if that's your job, you make sure that that lobby is the cleanest lobby, that if people drop their French fries, they would pick it up and eat it because it is very clean. And if your job is to clean that bathroom, you make sure that when they walk out of that bathroom, they leave it as clean as they found it. And that always stayed with me, because sometimes, depending on what we have, there's this pressure of your friends seeing you. Oh my God, you work at McDonald's, or you work at this. And so, but then I really became the best that I could. And I became so good that I got moved up. I got promoted. I was at the cash register, did all of the things. And then one day, someone from a bank walked in, and he said, what are you doing here? I says, what do you mean what I'm doing here? I got a child to feed and bills to pay, so I'm working. He says, why don't you give me a call? And of course, I put it aside. He came back the next day, the same question. He's like, seriously, give me a call. And I called, and I went to work for Homeowners Federal Savings and Loan. And that's where my career started and my journey started, and to where I am now, running the Peace Institute. So it started from, again, not great things that we are. So thank you for this question, because I have not gone back there in a very, very long time. So thank you for this question, as a gentle reminder that there is a long story before where I am today.
Yes, and so much of where you came from in terms of the values you're talking about that inform and that will help us understand better what you're doing today. Clementina, I was wondering if you could tell us about Lewis as a kid, what kind of kid he was, what it was like to be his mom. that
Thank
event?
you. Yeah, I tell people Lewis is every mother's child. Every mother has a Lewis. Every mother has a Lewis, especially if it's your oldest child.
Mhm.
You know, you just do everything and you want them to have everything that you never had. Yet Lewis didn't want for much. Lewis would really test. For Christmas, he would ask for certain things. And if I said no, he'll ask for it a second time. If I said no, then he would go to his aunt or his grandmother.
Mhm.
And so collectively we would, but he was very creative and very particular in what he wanted. He never asked for much. And when he asked for something 3 times, then we knew as a family that that's what he wanted. Yet, when you gave him what he wanted, what he would end up playing with was the boxes of whatever the gift was wrapped in and trash can that, anyway, so that's who he was. But yet, he ate me out of house and home. He would eat everything under the sun. And Lewis was very quiet, but yet he was also very caring and just very creative. I remember him in the 8th grade. He had a project that he participated in at the King School, King Middle School. And there were some questions. He was in a project called First Class Prep. And there were some questions that was asked, and he answered this way. What did he learn in class? He learned to make the impossible become possible. It was fun to be a preppy. And his message to incoming 8th graders was to work smart, not hard. Do the best you can and not what others expect of you. He was also a loving brother. He loved and took care of his younger sister, Alexandra and Alan. And I
Oh,
remember
when they were born,
when
how
they were born, yes. And I remember, him educating them or I don't want to say scolding them, but correcting them, especially when Alexandra would be talking and eating and talking with her mouth full. He would say, you shouldn't talk with your mouth full. And I would say, oh, you listen to what I say. He said, yeah, but I can't let you believe that I listen because then it will go to your head.
he was a smart kid.
He was a smart kid. And a part of that project also, he had a goal and a vision that he wanted to be the first Black president of the United States. Lewis never walked anywhere. He was driven everywhere simply because we were fair within the community. He loved to read books. He read the encyclopedia. Why? I don't know. I'm not an avid reader, but he loved to read. And he also collected matchbox cars, those little matchbox cars. He collected those. He collected sports cap. And he also collected back then in the newspaper, you would have the Sunday TV Guide Week. And so he collected those. Why? I don't know.
So, and how old was he when your other kids were born? What was the age difference there
Let's see, she was 3, so 13. He was 12
when she was born? Okay.
when she was born, yes. And Alan was 18 months, and Alan didn't know his brother.
Yeah. And so, and I know that you've spoken about he had some ideas about violence and gang violence in particular in your community. Did you want to share about how he had been thinking about that? Or
Yeah, Lewis joined a group called the Teens Against Gang Violence. He was invited to a meeting by his cousin, Tony. And so they went, and Lewis felt that this was the opportunity where he found his platform. He wanted to be the first Black president. Yes, he was concerned that if things didn't change by the time he got into the White House, his friends would either be dead, addicted to drugs, or in jail. And he would have to realize on the same old block, us, the adults. We say one thing and we do something different. He was always concerned, again, about the ongoing violence, that he couldn't understand why we were always blaming young people. When good things happen, every politician, every minister, every organization takes credit for the good things. When bad things happen, he noticed that we're blaming young people, we're blaming single mothers, we're blaming community. And so he just couldn't understand that. And he just wanted to be in the White House with his peers, his administration. You know, he had some friends, his cousin, their initials were, it was Louis, Antonio, Kane, and Kern. And so they all decided when they grew up and went their own ways and came back into the community that they were going to be working together. And they used their first name of their initials called lack respect, whatever that is, whatever they wanted that. But they decided that they were going to go their own ways, get their own different education, but they were going to make a commitment to come back to the community to really make a difference and make a change. His quote was, if true peace was to be achieved, it would be up to his generation, regardless of which side of the streets they come from. So he had goals, he had visions, he had dreams.
He was an amazing kid. I can totally
Every
imagine.
mother's child, every mother has this child. And I don't know if we realize it in the beginning or we wait, but every mother has this child.
And Clementina, take us through what happened to him when he was 15. And
yeah, after he joined the Teens Against Gang Violence, they were having their Christmas party December 20th. And before he left the house, he said to me, I have a meeting this evening. Can you make me a, what do you call it? Secret Santa. And so I was doing Mary Kay at the time, and I said, sure, I made him something. He says, oh yeah. This was before as he was leaving to school that morning. He said, oh yeah, can you make me fried chicken and mashed potatoes? He loved fried chicken, he loved mashed potatoes. And I guess I made the best fried chicken and the best mashed potatoes around. So I was going to my meeting for Mary Kay that evening, and I said, boy, I am not making any fried chicken because I do not want to smell like chicken. I'm going to be looking too good. He walked out of the house, and his last words were, you know, I think you should make me mashed potatoes and fried chicken because you never know, this may be my last meal. And he left. Didn't say anything. And when he came home, the key turns and he screamed, yes, with this excitement because he could smell the fried chicken. He said, yes, there is a God. And when he came home, I said, okay, here's your last meal. If you say it's going to be a last meal. He ate, packed him. I was to drive him to the train station, but my license expired. And he said, look, I can walk. Why are you always worried? It's really a 10-minute walk from here to the train station. And again, my anxiety level rose because we feared. Where he was killed is where we feared the most. And he said, look, nothing's going to happen. I'm going to walk. He says, with your luck, they're going to stop us. They're going to give you a ticket, and I'm going to be late to my meeting. So let me and I said, okay, be careful crossing the street and call me when you get there. Well, that call never came. He left about 3:15, 3:30, which would have taken 15 minutes to the station to get to the train. I then get a call from his cousin Tony that said, where's Louis? And I said, Louis left. And of course, in my mind, it's like, wait till I see this boy. I'm just going to wring his neck. But yet I knew he wouldn't go anywhere because he never went anywhere. An hour went by, 2 hours went by, 2 hours went by, and I then called Joseph, my then husband, and I said, Louis is not where he's supposed to be. And he came home, and usually when he comes home, you know, he goes into his office and does work, but this time he decided to turn on the answer. Back then we had answering machine. He decided to turn on the answering machine, and there was a message from the library that got a call from the hospital because they had his library card, and the library's receptionist said where Louis was. But then by that time, Joseph didn't tell me what had happened. He just says, I know where Louis is. He's in the hospital. And in my heart, I knew that if Louis couldn't call, that something bad happened. But I thought something bad happened. Maybe he got hit by a car. Never knew what happened until we got to the hospital, that he got caught in the crossfire of a rival shooter and he was brain dead. And so we went then to the hospital to really begin that process and to understand what happened to Lewis. And so I tell people when Lewis was killed, is for me, is when I woke up.
But really unimaginable, right?
It's unimaginable. It's going to the hospital. It's not understanding. It's not knowing. It's being judged because it's a Black kid being shot, and assumptions being made of who Lewis was. And, you know, the blessings are my mom worked where we were in the intensive care unit, and they knew who Lewis was because Lewis and Antonio, which is my nephew, would go to the hospital and my mom would, you know, show them around because she wanted them to see her grandson. So when I made this statement and I said, you know, I have to go home because I have to call my mother. And one of the doctors said, where's your mother? I said, she's in Honduras. That's when they knew who Lewis was because she worked there.
Yeah.
You know, and for me, I left the hospital empty-handed physically and within my soul. And that's when I realized after the media or the news, they shared that Lewis was an honor student. You know, in the beginning, he was gang involved. He just came out of DYS, but once they found out, they changed that narrative. We wanted for nothing. Resources, abundance of resources came to us, and we were able to lay Lewis to rest with dignity and compassion. And then that's when I decided that I needed to pay this forward because, again, that's when I said, that's when I woke up. I didn't want to focus on who killed Lewis Brown. I really wanted to focus on how do we make sure families like me whose loved ones are being murdered on our streets, even if their children are gang involved, how do we make sure that we respond to them with dignity and compassion? And so I developed this burial guide.
Yes, and I want to get to that, but I want to
yes.
I don't want anyone to miss this point because it seems it's one of the remarkable things about you and your thinking has been that it was very high profile, as you've pointed out. And I think what you're saying is initially lots of assumptions about who he was, and almost as though, what do you expect? That's what happens, right? When it was found out that he was an honors student and not gang related himself, not gang involved himself, you had a very different experience of how people thought about what happened.
Yes.
But you thought that's not really okay. That was your idea. And I would love for you to talk with us a little bit about that, how that felt clear to you and what you have ended up doing with that. Because that's not something everybody does. Obviously, your experience was it wasn't.
Not. Yeah, and I think I go back to my values. I go back to my faith. I go back to do unto others as you want done unto you. I really go back to that in my grief and my pain and my anger, because these things are not supposed to happen. And even after they found out that he was a good kid, then the narrative changed. And then, you know, unfortunately, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. That's not acceptable. That's not acceptable. And so I think for me, and again, I had to pause and I had to really do some self-reflection because the week before Lewis was killed, there was another Lewis Brown that was killed. And that's the same thing. But when I heard on the news that he was known to the police, I felt for that mother. But then I was able to breathe a sigh of relief. Okay, well, so I was that mother that was also making that assumption and justifying why bad things happen, because that's what we get. And I think for me, years later, I believe it's a sense of, okay, this can never happen to me until it happened to me. And so I really had to do my own internal soul searching and accounting for, wait a minute, you were that mother, and now here you are, this mother. What are you going to do? So I believe that, now I can say, God doesn't give you more than you can handle. Being angry with God and struggling and asking the questions, why this way? Why this way? And again, going back to my faith, well, what did Jesus do that was so horrible for him to be crucified? This is just me from my personal belief. And so then I really just had to go back and work with our city. The late Mayor Thomas M. Menino was really the acting mayor then when Lewis was killed. Work with our police commissioner, Police Commissioner Paul Evans, that again, that high profile homicide, how do I now use this to really transform the way we respond to families impacted by murder? And that's how it really started, working within the schools, working within the hospital and the police department.
And it has grown so much, and I want you to help take us through what it was, what your concerns were, what you was at its core, and also take us all the way through to what it's become. But I did cut you off when you wanted to show us your,
Oh,
I
yes.
believe
Well, that's what it started with. So I love writing is not my strength, but I realize when God tells me to do something, I do. So what we created was the Survivors Burial and Resource Guide. These, our hospitals have these in the trauma unit when a homicide, when a family is there and the victim dies. Now in these hospitals, families do not leave empty-handed the way I did. The violence intervention specialists or the social workers will make sure the family has the Survivors Burial and Resource Guide. We have it in English, in Spanish, in Haitian Creole, in Cape Verdean Creole, and in Chinese. And so working with other institutions to fund this to be translated. And so the police department also has it. If they die on the street, then again, the families do not leave empty-handed. It's really a step-by-step on what to do, from death notification, writing an obituary, writing a media statement, and not just a media statement, but also what to say and what not to say, because people will say the darndest thing. And giving us as survivors control back of where we lost control. And so that's one of the burial guides that we use, that again, and families don't have to pay for this. So publishing is what I like to do, but it's all self-publishing because I can't afford a publisher. And so nowadays, everything you can do on your own. And so also, so that's one of the publications that we have. We started with really the peace curriculum, teaching the value of peace through literature and community service learning, to really give the young people the opportunity with all the violence that's going on, with literature that we have now. And in many of our literatures is death, murder, kill, racism, hatred, all of the ills that we're dealing in society. So we work with the Boston Public School to really, how do we take these novels and how do we work with the teachers to develop the concept of peace and peacemaking? And so these were taught in the 10th grade of the Boston Public Schools, teaching peace through literature and community service learning.
So to take us through it, so you had this horrible trauma experience and didn't have the support from the institution that first was fielding it, which was the hospital. And that's part of where your guide came from. You also, I hear you, expanded into thinking about kids' lives in the community with the curriculum and working with the public schools. Wondering in there, I know you had mentioned to me a curriculum wherein you were hearing from kids. And you were learning quite a bit about how their lives were impacted by.
Yes, that was after the curriculum. Then they were asked, that's what after the teachers would teach, then they would ask to write an essay or do community service learning. They would write an essays on their commitment to peace and their contribution to peace, not what other people are doing. And then they were publish, we selected Louis D. Brown Peace Fellows, 30 Peace Fellows. They were honored in a public ceremony, and their essays were published in what we call Boston's Book of Peace. Those were compilations of essays written by the young people who went through the peace curriculum. And what it showed was a very small window into the hearts and minds of these young people. In the midst of what they're going through, they're writing about brothers and sisters and cousins and best friends and uncles and fathers who were either killed or imprisoned for murder. Mm-hmm. And within that, they still had to be in school learning your basic reading and writing and arithmetic. Mm-hmm. And so this was a way for them to show that they really had the power and they really had the solution as to how can we even think of peace when violence is happening. And so they're published authors. And that was in 1994, we developed 7 volumes of Boston's Book of Peace. And so those young people, well, they're older people now, but they're published authors. And those are, again, essays that we have, and we want to bring the peace curriculum back. But that's again, hearing from young people, which goes back to Lewis's belief and Lewis's saying, if true peace is to be achieved, it would be up to my generation, regardless of which side of the streets they come from. So the young people that were going through the peace curriculum were his generation then, but now he would have been 42 as he lived. They're still, focusing on peace and healing and just sharing their skills that they have.
I think one of the things I'm hearing in that, and heard from you last time we talked as well, that you all as adults learned a lot by just asking these questions of kids about how much they were impacted throughout. This was in Boston, Dorchester, yes?
Yes.
And I guess I'm really interested in the opening up of that conversation, what that meant for within schools for people to be asking and in communication with kids about what was happening in their lives.
It was important because what we learned also, young people, the students realized that they were not alone. Mm-hmm. When we asked, how many of you know of someone who was killed? Half the room. How many of you know of someone who's in prison for killing? The other half of the room. So what we realize is that we are interconnected. We never provided a space to talk about the grief and the trauma. And the only time our young people got attention is when they are reacting to something, which is unresolved grief and trauma. Mm-hmm. So we were doing social emotional learning before it became social emotional learning. It's teaching peace through literature and service learning. What we also wanted to do was also take away this stigma that, when you're in court, the judge wants to give you community service in order not to go to court, and that's either sweeping the street or sweeping the highway. We wanted to put some more dignity on service learning. Mm-hmm. Investing in your community should not be anything to be ashamed of. And so we also wanted to take away that stigma from this concept of community service learning, that you only require to do it when you do something bad and keeps you out of prison. And so really providing that space for these young people to share their grief, to share their pain, to also share their anger, but know that they can do something with that anger. Their anger doesn't need to lead them or take control over them, that they are in control of their anger. And that's the learning that we did, and that's the learning I learned from my living children, and that's the learning we're continuing to learn. Our children are not the problem. Mm-hmm. Our children, like Lewis said, he was born into this mess. Mm-hmm. We continue to blame children and not realizing that the children, they're not the future, they are the present, because when they become the future, then they're us, the adults, and nobody wants to listen to us. And so for us is now creating this concept of generation peace. We want people to see our young people. We want our children to see that they are this generation of peace.
Clementina, I wanted you to make the connection a little bit between your own experience of raising children after Lewis's death, especially your daughter who knew Lewis, in the midst of grieving yourself, which I think is one of the amazing things about your story that you created this institute out of such extraordinary grief while you were grieving and fielding your own children's grief. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your daughter, because there's a connection there between that and the kids you're hearing from in the schools, for instance.
Yeah, my children have always been my teacher. Lewis was my teacher at a young age, and Alexandra and Alan continue to be my teacher. Even now, they're adults. I remember with Alexandra, again, for anyone that's here, having a child um, die, whether it's a tragic death, whether it's a natural death, whatever that pain is, for some of us, we tend to focus or go deep into the one that's not here anymore and tend to lose sight of the ones that are here because, well, you should be blessed you're alive. Your brother is not here. And I think we kind of put pressure on them that they can grieve because they're too busy taking care of us. I remember, again, learning from my daughter, when she came back from Honduras and Lewis was in there. She didn't want to go anywhere, always attached. And so I was concerned. And we took her to see her pediatrician, and he's doing his examination with her, and he's watching her, and he's talking with her. But then she turns around and she's correcting him because he's not speaking proper English, which can't figure that out. And he looked at us and he said, "Whatever you're doing, continue to do it." Well, I got pissed off at him. I'm like, "I'm paying you money. What do you mean, whatever I'm doing? I don't know what I'm doing." He says, "You've got to be doing something." He says, "I give her a piece of paper, go draw what you feel, go write what you feel, or do that." And he says, "Well, whatever you're doing, continue to do it." And so continue to do that. I remember also that, again, we used to always do things as a family. And after Lewis was killed, again, people are still inviting us to go places, and I would make plans to go. And when the time comes, I would say, I just couldn't get out of bed to go. And it happened a few times. And I remember one day she looked at me and she says, "Do you love us? Or did you love Lewis more than you loved us?" And I looked at her, I'm like, "What? What do you mean that I love Lewis?" She said, "Because ever since Lewis is not here with us anymore, you don't want to do anything with us. You say you do, and then when it's time, you say you don't." That broke my heart. That broke my heart that I had no answer for her. I just had to pull up myself by the bootstrap and started to be a part of, again, including them and being with them. And then time went by, and I remember another time she said, "There are two types of pain." And again, as mothers, sometimes our children just, "Okay, what type of pain?" She says, "The pain when somebody hits you and it leaves a mark and you feel it and it hurts." She says, "There's the other type of pain. Whew. When your brother dies and your heart hurts and nobody knows and nobody sees and you're the only one that feels it." I think that was the day that my heart just broke into a million pieces, and maybe my heart just started to heal again because I realized that my child was hurting. I didn't believe that she could hurt that. How can you hurt? You're 3 years old. You really didn't know him. How could you hurt that much? And so she was my teacher in really getting out of my own way and realizing we all grieve differently. And then one day we're driving and she wants to call Lewis in heaven. And I says, "You can't call." He's like, "Well, why not? If you can write to Santa in the North Pole, why can't you call God in?" I didn't know. I could not I could not, I did not even have a comeback for her with that. So then I called Joseph and I said, look, can you just get a balloon, a helium balloon, and bring it? And I had her, I said, well, you can't call God, but you can write a letter. Let's send the letter to God in heaven. And so she wrote a letter. We put it in an envelope. And on the envelope, she wrote, dear God, please give to Louis. He's the lazy one on the couch. And so Joseph took her to the field and released the balloon, and the balloon went up. A couple of days later, we're driving, not thinking about it. She says, I think Louis got my letter. And I said, why? She says, because my heart feels happy. Okay. That's again knowing and realizing, like her pediatrician said, whatever I was doing was working. And then the other time she worked with her school at the Marshall and started a support group because she realized that there were other young people in there whose brother were also killed. And so she started that support group there. And because of her and Alan, my youngest son, we created this Always in My Heart workbook for grieving children. And her story and his story talking to us, the adults, telling us not to compare them to their brother or to their siblings, because siblings' grief is different. And that was the learning and the aha moment for me, that siblings' grief is different than a mother's grief, than a father's grief, than a grandmother's grief. And again, them being my teacher, and that's another workbook that we publish, but it's a very old that it needs to be revised.
People have been asking, I just want to assure everyone that when we send out our surveys, if you've registered for this, we will include resource lists. And on Clementina's website, on the Peace Institute's website, these are all listed. So people are wondering about things. And there is a wealth. I mean, we're barely scratching the surface of what the work that the Institute does. And I want to expand that a little. So I'm thinking like mother, like child with your kids around community and recognizing the strength in community and tapping that as a resource. And I wondered, my first encounter with the Peace Institute was the Mother's Day March. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that, how it came to be and what it is, an amazing event.
Yeah, thank you. And again, I always want to focus on the positive. I didn't want to do a stop the violence. I saw all the amazing and powerful work, the Jane Doe, the domestic violence, the AIDS walk. I mean, all of these important walks. And I wonder, well, who's walking for peace? And I know Mother's Day. Mother's Day is a day that's sacred. Louis would bring me burnt toast, runny eggs, and bitter black coffee for Mother's Day breakfast. Well, I miss that breakfast now. I would love to have that breakfast. And then realizing my two younger children, how does one celebrate? For me, what's one of the most sacred days while grieving the death, the tragic death. And so I realized, well, I want to do a Mother's Day walk for peace. And again, working with our city, our police department, our mayor, I'm sure people thought I was crazy. And they said, well, how, again, not saying selfish, but you can read between the lines. Why would you want to do something so public with such a painful, for mothers who are dealing with painful? And for me, then I said, okay, well, if nobody walks, I'm going to walk alone. Louis was killed. His death was not private. My grief is not private. Who else is feeling this way on this day? And so for me, I wanted to let people know this is our day. I don't want any flowers. I can't have my nasty breakfast my wonderful son used to make for me. So I want to come out and I want you to see me and I want to call for peace. I wanted to create this web of connection where we are losing our children on both ends. There are no winners in this game. And so then I said, I'll just walk by myself. And when other mothers heard that I was doing it, they would say, well, how selfish. You're going to walk by yourself. We want to walk with you. And it was a handful of us that walked. And people came out. And it was supposed to be a fundraiser, but we never raised any money because we weren't fundraisers. But it just took on a life of its own where we walked. And then we got mothers from the suburbs who said they were coming into Dorchester to walk with us, where they told their families, I don't want any flowers. I want us to walk together. And this is our 28th year walking for peace, where everybody now comes out to really walk together, to support each other while doing this. And it's still a fundraiser. It's still a fundraiser. I think we raised 500 and something thousand, and it's just for operations. But what happens then, it's showing who we are as a community. We're not a community where bad things happen. We're a community of assets, and we're a community that cares for each other. So we have mothers whose children are murdered, mothers whose children are in prison. We have fathers, you've been at the walk. We have who's who that comes to this walk. And if you didn't know who we were with pictures of our loved ones and pictures, you would not believe that this was mothers whose children have been murdered, because it's a walk for peace.
And it's not just the people who are walking, but there's people on the sidelines, all through the city. It's an
Yes.
experience of community. That's how I experienced
Yes,
it.
it is a sense of community, and it's a sense of saying we as people, regardless of our color, the community that we come from, our culture, there's more that we have in common than what separates us. And that's what this walk does. It brings us all together, and all walks of faith are also participating.
I want to talk about, we've touched on without really elaborating, and if someone were to go on your site, which I hope everyone will, they're going to see so many services, trainings, different things you do, and I hope we get to more than we have. But one of them that I really wanted to look at is how you've approached, going back to that original idea that it's not about you have a good kid and a not good kid. It's about we have a world in which there's this kind of suffering, including violence for so many, and especially I think it's fair to speak about it in terms of resources versus non-resourced people, and in terms of racism and communities of color. But you specifically have done a lot of work around prison, work in prisons, work around coming out of prison. You have not, like you said, you're not draw the line between like you're a victim of murder or you've lost a child to being in prison. And you've also done a lot of work, I believe, on also substance use in both those communities, in traumatized communities in various ways. And I wondered if you could help us think about, tell us what you're doing, and also help us think about it the way you do, which is very
Yeah, well, our healing support services this is a space for survivors of homicide, suicide, and overdose victims, as well as families of those whose loved ones are incarcerated. Because we're hurting, we're hurting. So that's the space. They meet virtually. Sometimes they meet in space. There's a healing and recovery group. There's a holistic healing. We have mindfulness. There's the Survivors of Homicide Victims Network. And also now we've just started the Unsolved Homicide Victims. So that's kind of the support group within our healing support services. And then we have our community reentry program, where our director, again, like I said, we're not just doing the programs, we're also living what we do. So our director of reentry service and our community reentry coordinator were both formerly incarcerated. So it really creates a pipeline from prison to progress for men that are in the correctional facilities office. So, we do peace from within in the prisons, again, teaching them peace, guided with the 7 principles of love, unity, faith, hope, courage, justice, and forgiveness, and really helping them to deal with their feelings. It's not about restorative justice, but deal with their own feelings so that they are then able to connect with their families in preparation for coming out. They offer mentors, family support, court support, support for parole, and they also have a men's healing connection support group. And what we do with them upon their reentry, they all get a reentry kit, a backpack with the basic needs and necessities. They also get classes on to get the CDL license if they want to, if they want to do constructions, if they want to do culinary. So really hearing what their needs are and working with the different systems to making those needs come through.
And remind us again, this is such an expansive vision that you have and implementation. Remind us again how you come to that, because you're not parsing, here's a victim, not only here's a good victim, but here's a victim. You're saying it's much more holistic, I guess.
It's holistic because the data tells us that, Laura. The data, I mean, this country is data driven.
Mhm.
There's so many researchers, and for me, the data tells us in order to address the issue of violence, intervention must happen at multiple levels.
Mhm.
And so that's the work that we do at multiple levels.
Yeah.
You know, is that now it's community violence intervention. The people closest to the pain are doing the work.
Mhm.
And that's kind of the work. We can't do it all, but we feel that that's the primary, secondary, and tertiary. Families, community, and society. And that's how the work that we do. If I knew I would be, I'm a visionary. I now have a plan. I have a staff of 25, $4.3 million budget, and we're building a center of healing, teaching, and learning in what the city considers one of the most violent neighborhoods. That's my backyard, Four Corners in Dorchester. And so that's 30 years worth of work. This is our 30th anniversary.
Mhm.
I tell people if I knew what I was doing, I'd be dangerous, Laura.
I hear you.
But I surround myself with people that are smarter than me,
Mhm.
with people that can help and guide me. You know, we have a network of providers network with social workers and ministers and just people that went to school to get their degrees in this. And for me, here is how this work is being done. And it is my faith
Mhm.
that has guided me. And as long as I stay focused on that vision that I was given, again, we have a vision to create and sustain an environment where families can live in peace and where all people are valued.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's the vision. It may not happen in my lifetime, yet that's the vision that I'm standing on.
And one of the things I think you've been spoken very eloquently about, and would invite you to speak again, is that idea about experience as expertise. You referenced it a minute ago where you said it comes from within the community. Can you speak more about that, what that idea?
You know, for me is again, when Lewis was killed, my faith is my foundation. When Lewis was killed, I lost my faith. I cursed at God. I did everything humanly possible. Yet, you know, I tell people I kiss the ground my late priest walks on. Because one, he never quoted scriptures, or when he did, I told him where to go and how to get there. And he heard that. He would just give me things to read. And he really provided a space where I could just get out all the rage and the anger that was inside of me. I'm still a very angry Black Latina woman. Yet I've learned not to let my anger, not to lead with my anger or my anger control. And that's me. That's going back to my faith. That's focusing on these 7 principles of love, unity, faith, hope, courage, justice, and forgiveness. I am the most important person. I have to take care of me first. You know, the analogy of when you're flying and the stewardess tells you if you're flying with children, put the mask on yourself first. I have to now practice that. Nothing happens without me taking care of myself, me checking my temperature, me dealing with my own anxiety before I lash out. I have to sit and reflect and spend time with God and seek for guidance with these principles. And how do I bring them? I know we're coming up on time, but we also have this healing modality called peace play in urban settings.
Yeah, you can, don't worry about time. We're good till 4:30.
Okay.
I would,
Okay,
since you said it, let me just invite people again, please write questions in. We have one which we will get to, Nicole Tucker, and anybody
okay,
else who wants to, but you say whatever you want to hear.
okay. And so the healing modalities, I got introduced by this healing modality called Santre wordplay by one of my spiritual advisors, Reverend Michelle Walsh. And so she introduced me to that, developed by Gisela Di Domenico. And I went and I was in a room, over 100 social workers, clinicians, initials behind their names, all white, and then me. And so I was there and I wanted to learn this modality. And I tell people this healing modality kept me out of a mental institution, and it kept me from taking my life and the life of my children. And because I liked it so much, we adopted it, got trained, and we call it peace play in urban settings because we have broken every rule the traditional peace play therapy has for you. And so that's another piece of healing modality that I have used for myself when I have no words, when I don't know what to say, when I don't know what I'm feeling, why I'm anxious. I go play in the sand and I create my world. And then I can breathe. And then I'm able to move to the next phase of whatever it is that I'm supposed to do.
You know, you mentioned that being the only person of color in the room wanting to learn this modality and who people were with initials. You know, you do a lot of building bridges back and forth, right? You've done work to work with people who are teaching, who are in hospitals about how to manage. And I think that's a piece of your answer about the expertise that lived experience brings us that should be honored and expanded upon, right?
Yeah.
Now you're talking about sort of the other way that you're like, well, here's this thing that hasn't been part of my experience in life, but I like it. I'm going to bring it back to this. But I do wonder, could you speak a little bit about that? How, you know, it's very timely and sadly always is timely to speak about gun violence and children and the public health issues of violence. But there's also, there's some great ways that we all talk about it, in some ways where the nuances of how it is in different communities and for different people can be not just missed but problematic. And I want to invite you to say anything you want about that.
Yeah, I think again, and thank you for that. It's while Lewis was high profile, we dealt with being at the forefront of the gun violence movement. And we've, if anybody remembers, and I'll invite Five American Handguns, Five American Kids, HBO, an HBO documentary special that really put some shed light on gun and the gun violence and gun owners and children, and guns in the homes and gun being used by suicide. So that was a really powerful video documentary that they did. And then where Lewis was the only child who didn't know who killed him. All the others was either someone in the neighborhood, young kid killed a cop because he didn't want to get caught. Another young child had a gun, 2-year-old killed a 2-year-old. And so someone else died by suicide. And then Lewis again was the only one that didn't know who killed him. And so really looking at it. And it's still that disparity. We still separate gun violence. When Columbine happened, we know some of the families because we've connected with them. But it's still that is the high profile that everybody comes out and provides. But then when the cameras go down, it's the same issue that we all deal with. Everybody goes away because you should be over it by now. And nobody wants to stay with you in the long haul. But yet the response to people in urban settings who are impacted by violence is so disproportionately that it's a secondary re-victimization. And so for us working with Dr. Peter Masiakos of Mass General, we created a documentary called The Quiet Room. That again, looking at how do we respond, and especially if you go into hospitals, how are you treated at hospitals, and finding ways to really, how do you provide a space for families that are waiting for that horrible notification when you're going to tell them that their child didn't make it, to really provide this safe space for them to be able to tell their story or to be able to receive that news and then not leave the hospital empty-handed. It's also, again, we see it happening that we separate domestic violence shootings versus sexual assault versus, you know, religious, you know, church shootings versus school shootings. So, and then here's the quote unquote black on black crime.
Mhm.
You know, that's justification. So for us is until we treat people with dignity and compassion, the response will always be inadequate. And so for us, gun laws are there, gun regulations, gun safety, but what happens in communities of colors when another gun legislation goes into effect? One, the gun industry makes more money
Mhm.
because people want to get their guns before the legislation goes in. And two, the way those gun regulations end up in communities of color is money for more police, money for swifter prosecution, and money for longer prison sentences. There's really not any resources for the aftermath, for the prevention,
Yeah,
for the
and
mental health.
yeah, that's what I hear you saying also in terms of prevention is for addressing it as a public health issue.
And the
Not,
data tells us that. The data tells us that, yeah, we're still doing it in a criminal justice. There's a new language now that's CVI, community violence intervention. Even the US Surgeon General talked about, again, gun violence as a public health issue. We're still not investing the dollars in the public health issue.
and I
And
definitely,
that's the advocacy we need to do.
yeah. And I guess one thing, correct me if I'm wrong, but my sense of what you've been doing with the Institute is you do a combination of working with existing institutions, schools, police, um, hospitals, but you also do things outside of those institutions. That's been my sense that you also mobilize community in your own ways. Not
Yeah,
only,
we have our faith. We have an interfaith committee, the Peace Institute, because the multi-faith community is really the leg that really carries us forward. I was baptized Methodist. I enjoy a good Baptist revival. I preached at Unitarian Universalist. But Catholicism is all I know. That's what I grew up in as a Catholic. And so for me, I don't focus on religion. I focus on relational relationship. What do we have in common as people of different faith? What do we believe in? And how do we bring that forth? So the faith community has really been able to sustain us. We also have the providers network, all of those people that are mandated according to the Victims' Bill of Rights to serve families. And then we have the survivors network, those of us who have been impacted coming together, transforming our pain and anger into power and action. Where September 23rd and 24th, through a network called the Alliance for Justice, first-time survivors of homicide victims, survivors of color, survivors of different violence are going to be on DC, advocating for the right to heal. Healing and peace need to be central in our conversation. And it's not. It's a by the way.
and I also, just to add, when you talk about this multi-faith group, I sense this from you. I can't remember the story that gets told about atheists maybe are the most faithful because they try to do, the ones that do try to do good without a sense that there's any reason beyond this life to do well. I think that's included in your community as well. I think you're a very expansive community sort of way of thinking about how do we address the human.
Yeah, the basic human, the basic, the basic need of an individual, of a family, and of a community. It's not rocket science.
And I think I said at the beginning, if I didn't, I certainly meant to. There was an artist, Karen Taub, I believe, a Jewish artist who dedicated her work to you as one of two people who embody be the change you want to see.
Be the change you want to see, yes.
Why I wanted to speak with you today as well, for us to all understand what is possible when you have a vision, no matter what you've been through. It's just incredible. I want to move to the one question that has come in, and again, encourage other people to write questions, but this is a great and important one from Nicole Tucker. She says, is there a way to take this and replicate it for refugees fleeing violence? The grade school my daughters attend has a high refugee population, which is more likely to have experienced a violent death within their families and friends versus within our local community. I don't know if she's still on because she said she might have to hop off, but such a great question.
Yeah,
Answer it.
I would say yes, everything in the universe can be replicated for whatever you need.
Mm.
And what I would say where we can start, and this is again, peace play in urban settings.
Mm.
This is the facilitator's guide that we've created. Actually, I don't know if anyone is in Boston on this platform. September 21st is International Day of Peace. We are hosting a Peace Play graduation on City Hall Plaza from 3 to 5, where the different community organizations that we have trained on this healing modality will be graduating, and they will be known as Peace Play practitioners. So they will take this and then begin to adapt it. So if Nicole is there, we can connect after, and that's what we want to do. Everything that we do can be replicated. We can work with anyone, any organization, any county, any district, any group to really say, here's the framework.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How can we work with you to make it fit
Mm-hmm.
the people that you are? And that's why it says it's replicated, because it's peaceful in urban setting. That's what we call it. But all the different, play therapists have their own, and they have to be certified by credentials. None of us are credentialed. We're not certified yet. It's spiritually and culturally relevant. So why not take it and then make it your own for it to work? So everything that we do is replicated. And that's where our training, technical assistant, and consultant arm comes in, that we will hear what you're looking for. We are not the expert. We just have the framework, and the experts are you and the community that you're serving and the people that are impacted, to hear from them.
Clementina, since this is coming up so much, what is your recommendation for people who want to pursue further work with the Peace Institute? They can go to the website, and then how would you recommend they begin this process of addressing the questions that people are asking?
Yeah, they can go to the website. There's different ways. There's a form that you would fill out, or can send an email to my assistant Najeri if you just want to connect with me. But then what we would do, if you filled out the form, then either our training and technical assistance, where we just lost our manager and our coordinator, so the person that we have is our community engagement. We don't want to give him much more work. So what we will do is just review the request that you're looking for, and then we will then follow up with you on that.
And so the website, first of all, it's easy to find as the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, but we will also, of course, be sending it along, the link for it along, and then you can take it from there. And I guess I did want to ask, since this has come up, you do have already a reach beyond Dorchester, quite a reach. And do you want to talk a little bit about other things you've been in?
Yeah, we do have a reach beyond Dorchester, in Massachusetts, beyond Massachusetts. We're actually doing a training in Brockton in October, and working again with that community and hearing what they do and being able to coordinate their network. They have an amazing network. Shares is the organization there, that they are the ones that respond to families and want to make sure that they are also equipped. So we're going to just convene the providers together for a resource day and conversation. Also, I'm a subject matter expert. I'm a consultant for the Office for Victims of Crime. So, for example, if police department, I've done training to the Dade County Police Department in Miami, Florida. We've done trainings in DC with the Governor's Alliance. We've done training in San Francisco, California, just on best practices in responding to families impacted by murder, trauma, grief, and loss. We've done best practices, whether it's any of our materials. And so it's gone beyond Boston, has gone beyond Massachusetts. I've done some consulting in the US Virgin Islands. So sky's the limit.
Just while we're on the subject of all the things you do, I'm going to miss some, so please bring them up if you do. But I know if you go to your website and look at, there's the healing and support, there's the training, there's the advocacy. Some of the ones I found that we haven't talked about. What's the girls' leadership piece that you do, and how did that come about?
So it's with the young girls. Again, they're not children and they're not adults, but getting them to, that was a pilot that we put together. So just really bringing them together to hear what their interests are, and then to connect them to the different part of interest. Like if they're interested in communications, to a radio station, to meet, radio personalities. Again, still their healing, which is central, and peace. So everything that we do for the adults, kind of making sure that they are also getting the same tools that they can then pass on to the younger generation behind them.
So that was part of the community sense that we need to feel in all sorts of ways and provide community for people in all sorts.
Yeah, because many times it's the adults that are always coming to the support groups, and then the kids may come and as a by the way. So really just providing a space for them.
Yeah.
And now they're adults.
I was going to ask you, what is your vision for where this is going? I know you are in the middle of a campaign and trying to grow. And I wonder if you could tell us just what should you have, what you will be doing.
Well, for us, the vision is we want to go back to where we started. We really want to go back to teaching this value of peace. We know we cannot stop from responding. And once we begin to train other cities and towns and communities to respond, it's that the weight is not falling on us. To purchase the burial guide, to purchase all the tools that we have, we want to go back to the beginning. So we're building the center because, again, we want to be able to make sure that there's a safe space where people can come and learn. We're scaling our programs, and also we want to make sure that we can afford to keep the people that are working with us so that they don't have to work 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet. So we really want to scale our programs and our income for our staff. And then we really want to go back and we want to lead the movement for peace. We have what's called Generation Peace, and those are, again, these young people. We call them the change makers, the leaders of today. And so equipping them to really bring these principles of peace to life and then just spread it out wild. Again, to be able to cultivate cycles of peace. So again, if anyone is in Boston, on April 21st, International Day of Peace, from 11 to 1, we will be doing peace pole trails. You see many times when violence happens, you have these teddy bears on these poles. Well, Ruth, who's our Generation Peace manager, artist in resident, is working with young people to really cultivate cycles of peace and turn these poles into peace poles with the principles of peace. And so we will be doing that. So the vision is really to invest in this generation and to really shift that narrative from the problem to the solution, where young people, each one is teaching one. And so maybe not in my lifetime, the focus is not going to be violence prevention or gun violence. Is going to be peace promotion and healing. It's shifting that narrative. It's not saying that the problem is not here. It's saying when we invest and manifesting good, then that's what comes out. When we invest and manifest in evil, then that's what leads. So we're looking to really shift that and create this vision of a place where people can live in peace and all of us are valued.
Mhm, mhm. It's quite a vision. And Clementina, what would you say? This, our series is called Communities Strengthening Themselves. You are an incredible example of someone who's mobilized community for yourself
A
and for
murder suspect is appearing in
Oops,
court
sorry.
today after police. They say 40.
Sorry.
everything okay?
Yeah.
So I was wondering what you would say about the meaning of community, what your journey, how you've told us such an amazing story today about your journey through loss and grief and into extraordinary mobilization of community for people grappling in all kinds of ways with some of what you were grappling with. What's your view about community and the power that it can have, and how any of us as individuals mobilize or participate in that?
Wow. Yeah. Community is it's a powerful word. It's a strong statement. We all have community. I think for me is really taking the time. Sometimes, and again, I'm gonna go to scripture, so forgive me for anyone. I'm not trying to convince anyone, but it's treat your neighbor as you would treat yourself. You have to be willing to know and to invest. My family is my community. My work is my community. When I'm in church, that's my community. Where I live, that's my community. So my community is abundant. My community is just not my family, and it's just not my neighborhood. It expands.
Mhm.
You guys are now part of my community that I would hope we stay connected. And so there's a quote, and I won't do it justice, but and I can send that to you. There's a quote by Deborah Prother Sticks that talks about, I'm not going to do it justice. So I'll find it and then I'll send it to you. But the meaning of community, she really looks at it that the problem is not for one neighborhood, one individual, and the solutions are also not just for one person. It's coming together and creating solutions where all of us have a voice in making sure that whatever the needs are for the community, that then they are met. And then Dr. Scott Peck has another one in the book, The Beat of a Different Drum, The Meaning of Community. Community who have learned how to mourn together, to grieve together, to laugh together, and to make each other's conditions our own. Coming together again and really being there for each other. That's what community is. So I believe we all have community. We are all connected with community. And how do we make sure healing and peace are a part of community? Because we also have community that some people are just not nice people. They're also a member of our community.
And often also struggling is what I
Yes, yes. And so we have to embrace everybody together to make sure that in the end, our community is better than what we found it.
So let me pick up on that a little bit. What you just said now makes me think back to your early days of having the worst of bullying, racism, all kinds of things coming at you as a young child, and making some decision to try to be in positive relation to people and to access what was possible in that community of your classroom. So
Yes.
I see that in how you've accessed, but I also think you've been talking about the experience, the incredible tragedy of the loss of Lewis in the way that you did, and you have been talking about feeling isolated in that, right? Going to the hospital and not having the mobilization of community there for you in that moment. And when you talked about your daughter saying, "Do you actually love us?" Realizing that there was a separation that had happened between the two of you in that, and the healing that you keep doing what you're doing was about connecting. That seems to be what the journey was. But you've done this thing of noticing when isolation and and I do think grief brings us to isolation, as does shame, as does hostility in communities, all kinds of things that bring us to isolation. I think you've been working against that in your own journey at every step of the way. And the Peace Institute reflects that. So the burial guide is one great example of you saying, I feel alone here. I don't have to be quite as alone, nor does anybody else going through this. The Mother's Day March is another extraordinary example of that, right? I'll march alone, and how many people derive incredible sustenance from that, even just from that one day. So I just wanted to highlight that, because it's part of why I wanted to talk with you, is that I think that is truly visionary to say, if community doesn't exist here in the ways it ought to, how do I make it happen? And I think we've done that.
Yeah. Yes, I have, because again, I think for me, I don't like, although I'm an introvert, pretending to be an extrovert, I don't like doing things alone. I want to know who else is as crazy as I am. And let's do this crazy thing together. And in the end, that's what the world needs. John Lennon has a song that says, I don't even know if it's him, all the world needs is love, something like that. So we really do we just need to be caring and loving and compassionate without judgment. We're a world that judges, and we preach hate, and we teach hate, and we walk in hate, and we also walk in love and the courage and the faith and the forgiveness. So it's that both and. You know, again, Scott Peck book, The Road Less Traveled. I feel I'm on the road less traveled, because the world is going to hell in a handbasket. And here I am talking about love and peace, and we are all doing it. It just doesn't get the attention. So thank you for providing this platform, because that's what it is. There are more of us that are doing amazing, beautiful, powerful work, but it's not going to get promoted because it's too touchy-feely.
Well, what I think is that the questions that came in, the number of people that were saying, how can I do this in my community? Does it translate to something else? Was exactly what I was hoping in doing this series. I think that's, in short, you're inspirational, the work you've done. And if it lights a spark for someone else to figure out what they can do in their own community, I think we often just lack a sense of vision and belief in that vision, because it's not, we might have ideas, but it's really belief in that vision.
Yes.
And
yes.
then,
Yes, and it's doable. It's doable. We can work, we can create proposals, people to fund it, that is not coming out of your pocket. And for me, it is that's the vision. The vision is to take this and just cultivate cycles of peace, plant seeds of peace for them to grow and to nurture and to cultivate, and to just bring joy and happiness into a world that's it's painful.
Yeah, and I definitely hear how much that also has come out of your relationship with Lewis, who had his own visions.
Yeah.
I hear that commitment in all the work you've done as well, which doesn't change the loss and the tragedy of it, but is also, like you keep talking both and, is also a part of it, right? So,
yeah. No, I am honored to just be on this platform, and like you said, whatever light sparks, whatever peace from me, and if you're doing something, please let me know, share it with me. I think our communication team is on here in the background. Our goal is to help, to promote, and to show there's so much more goodness than evil in the world.
Thank you so much. I don't know if you have parting words for us beyond those are great parting words. Is there any? I want to make sure that I've left you space if you want to say anything else to.
I just said stay connected with us, and I would love to keep you guys informed as to how our campaign for peace is going. See, even our campaign, it's not a capital campaign, it's a campaign for peace.
Okay. Yes, and we will be following that journey with eager eyes about what you're doing next. And I do hope this sparks other people's sense of optimism and vision about what can be done. And I think the offer of connection to people who want to do something in their communities is an incredibly important one as well. So thank you so much, Clementina.
Thank you so much. Blessings to everybody. Thank you.
And just to tell the audience, you will receive a survey from us. We really appreciate your feedback. So we hope you will fill that out for us. And
All right. Have a good one.
take care. Bye-bye.